James, David Bowie and U2 are just some of the bands who have benefited from his Midas touch. In his spare time, he invented ambient music, is a patron of the War Child charity, and can currently be found exhibiting his video artwork around the globe.
I think creativity is something you can manage.
Sounds really good, that thing.
The whole music business is desperately trying to bribe him and sleep with him in order to get their coffee shows in his home. And he just like kind of goes through in his own little kind of world, choosing this project he wants to work with, and then goes off and does his video installations in Hamburg at the weekend.
Don't worry if you've heard it all before. It doesn't matter. We can do something new, I'm sure.
Brian, it's impossible to sum up your career in a nutshell, really, but I think to most people you're probably best known as a musical guru to the likes of David Bowie and Talking Heads and U2, and I could go on forever. Why do you think that you've been so successful in a field that doesn't normally make household names of record producers?
Well, first of all, I'm very opinionated, which I think, and secondly, I talk a lot about my opinions, so I get probably more press space than I deserve for that reason, because I articulate more than most other people do.
Do you think you also have quite a unique approach to the whole art of record production?
I think it probably is unique in the sense that I always try to ask the biggest possible question, which is, why are we doing music in the first place?
So, you ask them that before you actually start working with them, and if you don't get a satisfactory answer, you say, no, sorry.
No, I don't. We usually kind of work our way up to that big question. It starts with somewhat smaller questions, and we end up at some critical point in the record saying, why are we doing this? What are we hoping to make? What change do we want to make in the world? So it quite quickly becomes philosophical in some way or another, what you're doing.
I mean, a lot of people say that, for example, with U2, you were the catalyst for them developing a sense of irony. I don't know if you agree with that or not, but do you think that you have been the catalyst in a lot of people's careers in terms of making them look at the bigger picture, as it were?
I think what I always try to do in the studio is to look at the music that we're doing and to try to connect up with the rest of what everybody else is doing. I don't mean what other musicians are doing necessarily, but what filmmakers, fashion designers, writers, painters are doing. So I try to find out whereabouts in the total cultural picture the thing is located. So I think by doing that, it expands to the sense of what they're doing in some way, and it makes it clearer to them what they're doing. So that is a catalyzing process, because actually one of the things it does is takes you out of the details of what you're doing, and suddenly you're looking outside into it. You know, you're seeing it as a whole shape.
So you're stepping outside.
Yeah, I mean, the easiest thing to do in the recording studio, as in any technical situation, is to get lost in what I call screwdriver world, where you're actually turning tiny little screws like this and forgetting what the whole machine is.
Your own music is a far cry from the records that you produce, but it's had an enormous impact, I would say, on contemporary music today. Did you ever have any idea that it would have such far-reaching effects on, for example, music for airports?
Well, I always expected to have huge hits.
And you've been disappointed over and over.
No, it's funny, when you're working on something, by the time you finish it, it seems completely obvious to you that it ought to exist. You know, you think, everybody will see the point of this straight away. And I've always been surprised that they didn't actually see it straight away. It took a little while to happen. But
is that frustrating or quite satisfying to know that you're really that far ahead of the game, as it were?
it's disappointing actually, because usually if you're proud of something and you finish it, you're very, very high on it, and it comes out and you're so thrilled with yourself, and then nobody really pays much attention to it.
You're left alone.
Or if they do, they make sarcastic comments about it, and then a few years later, by the time you start to do something else, they then refer to that first thing that they didn't pay attention to and say, why didn't you do more of that kind of thing?
Banging your head against the wall.
Yeah.
I do. I mean, musically speaking, now you're moving towards, I think what's termed DIY music, sort of self-evolving compositions that never sound the same twice. Do you think that's the direction music is actually heading in?
Well, I think that's one direction. Can I just explain a little bit what that's about? You can chop it.
You could tell that it's a very naively put question, desperately hoping you would explain.
Well, I call it generative music, and this is music which evolves according to a set of instructions and conditions that you've given it. Now, at the moment, I'm making this using a computer. It doesn't have to be computer-based, but currently it is. And so what one is doing is sort of composing at a different level. Instead of specifying precise notes and phrases and shapes, which is what people traditionally understand by composing, what you're specifying is a process which will produce a piece of music. So it's a kind of what I call meta composition, really. It's a level behind ordinary composition. It's not a completely new idea because it's similar to what Schoenberg was doing, in fact, by trying to set up a group of rules by which music could be produced. So I've been working with that for a while, and I now have several pieces of music that actually last forever. If you switch them on, they'll just continue making themselves forever, and they will probably never repeat.
I'm sure your fans will be delighted. But none of these things would actually be possible if it wasn't for the advent of new technologies. Do you think that they are a sort of democratizing influence? Do you think that they have the chance to revolutionize arts as we know them now?
Well, certainly in pop music, one of the most interesting things is that every time there has been a major technological breakthrough, it's invited in a whole lot of new talents who would not have been musicians either. For instance, me, I was educated as a painter, and by the time of the late 60s, which was just about when recording studios were becoming interesting places to be, I sort of realized that the most interesting kind of painting I could do was with sound. And a recording studio is a place for painting with sound, basically. It's quite different from any traditional way of composing, because in a studio you really can put a color on and scrape another one off and change this one and stretch that and pull that. But you can do all of those things with sound. So I think one of the reasons that a lot of people from art schools went into music in the 60s and 70s was because they realized this had become a plastic art. Music had become a plastic art rather than a performance-based art. So every time that happens in music, suddenly a whole lot of new people, a whole new constituency become an input into music. For instance, when the sampler was invented or became popular in the late 70s and early 80s.
You don't mean the embroidery thing?
Not that kind of sampler. No. A sampler is a machine for grabbing pieces of sound from anywhere, often from other records, and then being able to organize them like any other piece of music. So you can make a loop from a little phrase you pick up from another record. Well, what that immediately did, of course, was it invited people who had very interesting record collections to become artists and who knew their record collections well. So it sort of made DJs, people who had previously been curators, you might say. You know, a DJ is a curator in the music business. It made curators into artists. It's a very interesting process, this inclusiveness that pop music has.
For a man who's fascinated and kind of, enjoys the future to the extent you did, today is quite an important day in that it's 1,000 days to the millennium, is it not? And you're launching a calendar for your charity, War Child.
That's right.
Which will count us down. Do you think that people are fearful or excited about the advent of this new century?
Well, I'll tell you what I do think, which is that the horizon that we call the future has become shorter and shorter. A friend of mine says that when he was a kid, found rats.